done here. You have to disable the chat feature on it, and you also have to disable comments on all the videos, which has to be done manually. Right now, I'm working out a way to just have it happen automatically. So hopefully it'll show up here now.
You can see now. Just missed the button earlier.
There it is. Now we're live. It says we're live now. So I'm going to click on that, and here's our meeting. There we are.
10-second delay.
Yeah, I can actually make a full screen, which should actually help get through some of that stuff.
Oh,
And now you can hear it, by the way. If you hear it, you're good.
So how is it moving from?
It's actually picking up sound over there. And now you can hear it, by the way. So if I'm speaking now, eventually it should find me. Oh, it found Matt. It's actually picking up sound. We can disable that, by the way.
You may want to, then just.
You can just make it big. It's about a 30-second delay.
I guess what I'm saying is it's zooming out on it. It's not panning, it's just zooming.
Right. And I can actually manually do this just by pulling that over here, or I can pull it over here, or I can just I can lock it on this section of the room.
That's me.
So now this is a good way to hold meetings if you want to otherwise. And you can still do this on Facebook and on the other channels, just can't do it in multiple places. This is defaulting to there because that's the spot where it's pointed. Right. So we'll have to fix that right there. This is pretty much how it works. It's a pretty easy functioning thing. It doesn't take much time. But you hear the sound. Now if you say something like, Mayor, if you make a speech if you can, or if you can listen for a moment.
But I was looking at the audience and there's no one speaking in the audience.
Right, I'm going to fix that. You hear the sound. Now if you say something like, Mayor, if you make a speech if you can, or if you can listen. Autopilot's off, live follow is on, and Find Faces is on.
So can they listen, can they view this and listen to our other audio videos? So this replaces that?
Yeah, this is just this unit right here.
Well, they could do both. If they needed this.
Because the audio we
insane.
normally have is actually quite good.
Yeah.
I was listening to
The delays on them would not.
Now, a couple things to set there right now is that we're hearing the sound of the sound, so it's going to be a little bit echoey what you're doing here. So if you were to say something there, like say hello and wave your hand, you watch the delay.
Well, I noticed that on the other ones already.
See, so because we are hearing our own audio, it sounds noisier than it normally would be. Okay. So anyway, in fact, I can mute it. And then there's that. So this is a really nice system. It's very simple. It's very easy to use. The only drawback is you do have to have the app loaded to an iPad or an iPhone. I think there's an Android app too. No, not currently an Android app. So that's basically how it works. And I would recommend we keep it to the YouTube channel, that we share that YouTube channel on our Facebook, and it automatically posts to our Twitter already. So, and also archive all the videos.
Questions?
I mean, I would concur about using Facebook. It is the second largest search engine on the internet.
Yeah. Like you said, the storage issue with Facebook is once we put these long meetings on there, they're going to start charging us to keep the data. Now, we have over 3,000 users of our Facebook page right now, and to switch pages would be counterproductive at this point.
I think we just post the link.
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, you can post the links to that, yes, absolutely.
So Mike just asked a question, and I had thought of this, but we haven't had a chance to test. Because you can put the audio to the iPad, if we buy a splitter for our normal audio, we might actually be able to tie these audio into that. We don't know for sure that that'll work, but we're going to trial that next week to see if that'll work.
That would be better, and I would recommend it if we can, absolutely.
Have a great trip and don't worry about it.
Thank you. Anyway, thanks, Matt. And actually, Matt was a big help in getting this tested.
Yeah, thank you.
We worked through a lot of stuff,
And
so.
also last week, for giving us the options, that was very helpful.
If you guys have any other questions, feel free to email, and I'll get back to you on Monday.
All right, have a safe trip, and good luck getting your dogs settled.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and close this and move on to the other parts of the report. We can be done. done with that. One of the
Can we
items.
pause just one second?
Sure.
Is it, Kevin, you have an announcement first?
Yes.
If we can do that, then we'll, cause you're coming up.
Just right here.
Introduce yourself and who
Alright.
you're with.
So, hi, I'm Kevin, in case any of you guys don't know me, I'm the city council mayor, and I know you
You're
guys.
better looking than the local mayor.
A lot more hair.
And a heck of a photographer too, by the way.
Thank you. I know we haven't really had like much engagement with the city council and the city council here. You guys are maybe eventually make some kind of changes to that, but anyway, I would like to invite you to our annual dinner with the mayor, which will be on September 4th, which is a Tuesday, here in the community room, and I'm gonna have to talk to Ann Mitchell about setting up tables and stuff for that. And then we will be having Cafe Rio catering, unless anyone has any objections or any other recommendations. Yeah. It's a taco bar, so it's gonna be, you guys have been to Cafe Rio, it's like the sweet pulled pork and the like the chicken that's also shredded. And I guess if you don't want to put meat on there, you can have vegetarian tacos. I don't know.
What about gluten free?
Oh.
Just the rice. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I think we have some beans and stuff. Yeah. So yeah, that will be happening again September 4th at 6:30 in the community room, and love to see anyone, city council, city staff.
Yeah, the department heads, we've usually had Paula and Dan come as well, so yeah, kind of give your.
Brad would have an invited. Any, I guess, topics as a review if you want to come.
So kind of what's your agenda at today?
So
Just say hi and leave? or-
So I will keep fleshing them out up until we go, but right now the plan is to probably have dinner initially, and then I guess if you have any stories, I know that we always tell stories about the city and its development and stuff like that, and then we'll probably have to a little bit of an extended Q&A session with you, I guess with any of the city council members.
They all have stories.
That's right.
$24.99. 34.
No, but yeah, well, we've been to those in the past and they're very, I don't know, they remind me to meet all the youth and to hear about their backgrounds, and I think each council member sits at a different table and interacts with them, and then, like you say, some Q&As later from each of the council members from the youth is always kind of fun to do and get to know each other, so.
I might make a recommendation.
Okay.
You might not like it.
No, it's-
I think it would be neat to have a basket where everybody puts their phones, so
Ooh.
that we don't have any distractions,
Okay.
and you can get more of our attention, and you
Yeah.
can get more of your
I'll-
attention. I don't know if that's possible, but,
Well, you might have to have a few more officers there.
well, I just know from our experience with, my last experience with youth and city council and all kids, it seems like there's a lot of this going on.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
We'll talk about it, yeah.
Maybe
As long as I don't
maybe-
have to put my phone down.
I will commit to putting my phone down.
Okay,
I'll be the example, yeah.
great.
If you like.
And
My
then,
wife reminds me of them all the time.
alright, does anyone else have any recommendations, anything,
Just if you have anything specific you would like us to do, let us know. One
Okay.
other than that, we'll play it later.
So, yeah, it should be pretty casual, I guess, nothing super fancy or complicated, sorry.
That's my thing. We will be relatively casual, I just telling you, because
Become-
we have scheduled a walking tour.
Right.
The Canyon Center, right?
Right, Scott told me it's about that last week.
Yeah.
So 6:30, and then it probably should be an hour, maybe a little bit over that, shouldn't be super
Okay.
difficult.
Now, tell us again, where do you go to school? Where do you-
I go to West High, so,
Oh.
yeah, I live just, we met at the cafe at block party. So I live on Creighton Way, just down the street a little bit, but I can go to West. Yeah.
My neighbor across the street teaches at West.
Oh, yeah, that's,
Rhodes.
um,
Neat school.
Yeah.
Love that.
No. Yeah, we have, and you can't, there's West, Hillcrest, Skyline, a lot of Skyline, and then Bryan is where,
That's his Brenda Rhodes.
so, yeah, the IB programs, we get them from all over. The requirement is that they need to live in the city or go to school in the city, so, and be in high school.
all right.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I guess,
Sure.
any other updates, cause I don't know if you guys can contact me, but I guess just talk to Scott.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, that's about all I'm
Okay.
saying. Okay, thank you guys.
Thanks, Kevin. See you.
Bye.
thank you for letting me,
No, that's fine, and thanks to Kevin, he's a great guy, he's helped me out before.
Yep, all right, we'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, sir. Just a couple of media reports. Before I do that, I will get you a, proof of the newsletter here this evening before I leave. I'll print it out in my office when I'm not doing this. And, we need to get that back and get to the, edited, finalized before the end of the week. So whatever we can do would be great. I did put the story about the tax increase. It's very matter of fact, very succinct.
I was just looking for that, where did that go?
What?
On the website? It's not on the website?
We have it on the website yet, no. I did an update on social media, no. So this is a story for this September newsletter we're talking about.
I had a constituent call me today and ask where things were at, and said that they looked on the website to see where it fell out, and
Right.
didn't see it, so I just wondered, we have open house tax hearing planned as the.
Right, I'm gonna follow,
We can,
I'm gonna update that story to say what happened, but it kinda happened fast, so I didn't get to that yet. But we've been preparing to put it in the September newsletter, which is the thing that I'm working on now. So we'll get it done, I'll get it done tonight even.
But again, I think what the question is hopefully we can update the website so it's, have the old news.
Sure. The process usually goes to newsletter and then to the website, so, yeah, this is more immediate, so we'll get it done faster. Thank you. Alright, so that's what I have there, we'll go ahead and shut up, anyway, so I'll get that to you tonight, and that's really all that I have in terms of the reports, which I'll show now. And we are still streaming, by the way, so you know, so. Oops, turned it off. Sorry about that.
Right now, police in Cottonwood Heights are looking for two people accused of stealing a cell phone. They say these two that you see here took the phone from their waitress at Denny's. Investigators say they then sent a private video to the victim's friends and family. Police say if you recognize either of the suspects, please call them. And new at 6, FanX.
By the way, these are about 2 weeks old because we haven't had a media report for a few weeks, so yes, I don't know if there's updates on this or not.
Yeah, so we were able to track down the culprits and arrest both of them that were involved, but in this case, the damage was already done.
Was this just a prank or something malicious or?
It was a crime of opportunity. You know, taking the cell phone was one thing, but dispersing her private pictures was pretty malicious and hurtful. In my opinion, that's the part that's unforgivable, so.
It's pretty rotten what they did.
Happening now, police in Cottonwood Heights are looking for this man. They say he stole a credit card from Avassa Fitness in Sandy, then tried to buy a laptop at a Target in Cottonwood Heights. Police say the man is white, in his 20s, and has multiple tattoos. If you know who he is, call police.
Yeah, I don't know the status of that one yet.
Tonight, the city of Cottonwood Heights will discuss a proposed property tax increase. The proposal would mean a yearly increase of close to $100 for a house worth $430,000 or $175 for a business worth the same amount. The budget changes come after a proposal in May and cut police and fire services. The meeting will be at 7 p.m. at the Cottonwood Heights City Hall.
Evelyn Payson.
And nobody came to the media for that, other than the television media didn't come after that. They just, that. And so there's no other report about it. So, there's only a few reports, one about mentioning the ribbon cutting or the groundbreaking, which they didn't cover as well. So a lot of news that was out there, but that's it. That's all I have. Any questions?
Questions of Dan?
I'll get a proof and I'll hand it over to you here sometime during the meeting.
Okay, we have some guests here today, actually, Councilmember Bruce introduced these gentlemen to us, to me and others a few weeks back. Zach Frankel and Mitch Schau? Okay, come on up. This is regarding Utah River Council Rain Barrel Program. Maybe squeeze in there.
Oh, would you like me to sit? Okay. Here.
much, everybody, for your time this afternoon. We are eager to speak with you and honored to have the chance to take your time to talk about this program. I want to thank Councilwoman Lewis and Mayor Peterson for your time a few weeks ago, meeting to talk about this program. We're here from the Utah Rivers Council. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We were incorporated in 1994, so we've been working on water sustainability, water policy here in Utah for almost 25 years. We're really excited about what this new program that we're here today to talk to you about, which is called Rain Harvest, which is our name for rain barrel collection. It's a wonderful program that we have been involved in with about 8 different municipalities in Utah. And we're going to just take a few minutes to talk about how the program works. So the idea of this rain barrel program is that we partner with municipalities who subsidize the price of these rain barrels for your specific residents. And so what we're here today to present to you is the possibility of doing this in what we talked about was next year, 2019, first or second quarter. And the idea of these rain barrels is just to capture the water that's going into residents' rain gutters as it flows off their roof, and prevent the water from, capture the water and use it locally in their gardens and on their yards. And so there's a number of benefits that this program provides in the 3 years that we've been doing it, and we've sold about 4,000 barrels now to different Utah residents, different municipalities through this partnership. And of course, the primary benefit that everybody thinks about when we talk about collecting rainwater is that it conserves water, which is great. Those 2 words, you know, they have a lot of benefit to people. They, oh yeah, we should be conserving water. It's the year 2018, a lot of focus on water. The second benefit, of course, is that it improves water quality, because the water that we collect in this manner and prevent from flowing across our streets and gutters means that that water doesn't go into the gutter and doesn't collect the pollution that's on our streets and gutters. Our tires, for example, are constantly losing rubber. That's why we have to replace them. That's going into our water supply, and it's jeopardizing our water quality. One of the best benefits that we like to focus on is how much money it saves residents. We talk about saving residents money because, of course, they use the water in these stored barrels instead of turning on their sprinklers or their hose. But it also saves communities money by lowering water demand across the board. And so we've seen benefits, and residents absolutely love the barrels. We've never had anybody return a barrel either for any quality purposes or because they weren't satisfied. In fact, they become emphatic lovers of their rain barrel. And then, of course, the final benefit we want to talk about briefly is the benefit to ecosystems. And when we talk about ecosystems, that's kind of bees and bunnies word. It's hard to know what we're talking about when we talk about ecosystems here in Cottonwood Heights. But the one, of course, we're talking about is the watershed we live in, which, of course, is the Great Salt Lake. And so this time lapse, unfortunately, shows the problems we're suffering here in Utah as a function of the Great Salt Lake's declining water levels from both upstream diversions, and what we're seeing is an observable decline in snowpack over the years. So this is about a 20-year time lapse, beginning in 1984 when the lake was at its relative record high, and its low point in the fall of 2016. And so there was a study done at Utah State that found the lake is about half of its normal average volume, and would be 11 feet higher. And as that lake lowers, it has real consequences and impacts across a broad community. But we don't have time to jump into that. We want to get into the particulars of this program, and so Nick Scow is our conservation director, and he is really the one that started this program, and he's going to talk a little bit about the big picture and take it down to the nuts and bolts of how this system works.
Sure. So when we first looked into doing this program in 2015, we realized that there were really scores of cities across the U.S. offering one particular barrel, this IV rain barrel, that's very user-friendly. It's recycled plastic, has a screen on top, takes care of all the concerns that municipalities have about safety, public health, and that was really important to us. And it also was the most cost-effective. So have some more detailed spec charts But we also found that there was really a rain harvesting revolution sweeping across the U.S., primarily for water quality and conservation, but it is hard to find any large metropolitan area in the United States that hasn't embraced rainwater harvesting to help with both of these issues. And what we wanted to do was make a program that's specifically tailored to our community, to northern Utah, to this geography, and also listening to the concerns of some of our municipal partners. So rain harvest is a little bit different than maybe you've seen some rain barrels offered at, you know, a farmer's market on Saturday or anything. We try to make this as easy as possible for our municipal partners. So as Zach mentioned, our municipal partners help us lower the cost. So this is an example of our website from a few years ago, but what we do is we offer the barrels this year with Mill Creek and Salt Lake County watershed for $50 a piece to residents that were in those jurisdictions. There's $75 is our wholesale cost. So the city's effectively providing a $25 per barrel subsidy in a limited quantity. Mill Creek did 200 barrels, and it just depends on each particular municipality. So we also like to make it really, really easy for people to get these barrels. So we set up a pre-order website here where people can go and purchase their rain barrels. That way also we don't end up with several hundred extra rain barrels that the city needs to store, or we put in the mayor's backyard, or I don't know what we do from here. That was a concern a lot of our partners had. And really, you know, what we found in our experience, our 20-year plus experience doing conservation work, is if you make it easy for people, they're willing to give it a try. And it really just goes from there. And so what we do is we really just ask our municipal partners, in addition to the subsidy, to help us just advertise the sale of rain barrels to the residents. So you can see an example here. This was a Murray newsletter. They sent out an alert, and we did it with them. And then we just drive people to the website. Really, Rivers Council does most of this marketing work. We prefer for the elected officials to, you know, be the face of the program if they're interested. Sometimes that's been the case. We've done press conferences. In other cases, Zach or I will handle it. But we're really excited about communities showing more leadership around water conservation. And that's something we welcome. So what we do then is sell the barrels for about 4 weeks to 6 weeks online. Every single time we've done this, we've run out of the subsidized barrels, and we continue to make them available at the $75 cost to everyone else who didn't get one. We've sold thousands of those at this point. And then we basically just have a big fun event. This is an example of one that was in North Carolina on a time lapse from using the same rain barrel, but because they can stack inside each other, we get 33 on a pallet, and it keeps the shipping costs down. They just ship them here to Cottonwood Heights one morning, and we have distributed as many as 1,056 rain barrels in a 4-hour period. And so what we're trying to do there is make it really easy for people. We share all the materials from our partner municipalities, information about water quality, water conservation initiatives, anything. And then we get a bunch of volunteers there. Sometimes the cities aren't able to help us, and that's fine. In other cases, they want to be very involved. Mayor Silvestrini shook every hand of everyone that got a rain barrel this year. I was very excited about it. And it's really fun. We found that doing this program, it really cuts across all sectors of water use in the community. We found, you know, fixed income, sweet old grandmothers that are excited about the subsidized barrel, people who are already conservation minded, people who are really into being prepared for oncoming, you know, shortages and preppers, if you will. Really everyone, and it's been really interesting. So just to wrap it up, we've now distributed nearly 4,000 rain barrels since 2015, partnering with 8 municipalities. We're saving approximately 200,000 gallons of water every time it rains enough to fill a 50-gallon barrel. And my favorite part, as someone that does conservation work, is we've reached approximately 1,500 households and helped them begin their journey into water conservation. And what research shows, not just our own, but from larger water providers across the West, is when people begin with something like a rain barrel, they then might purchase a low flow shower head or toilet next year, or a smart controller for their sprinkler system. It really just begins there. This is not the silver bullet solution to all of our water needs in the future, and the only way to conserve water, but it's a great tool, very visible, and it's been immensely popular. So we're excited to meet with the mayor and Councilmember Bruce, and appreciate the opportunity to be here with you this evening.
Do you guys have any questions about anything presented, or?
Well, let's open it up and see if the council has some questions.
50 gallons is, you've got a, well, it's 2,500 square foot roof. How much is that, how many inches of water is that? Is that half, a quarter, an inch? What happens when it really rains hard?
When it really rains hard, it's gonna fill and then overflow as the barrel is designed to do, and so it just continues on acting like the original.
So there's an overflow
gutter.
out on it?
Yeah, and so you connect the overflow tube to the, wherever the rain gutter was going originally. But what people do is they buy several of them and connect them together so that you can collect, literally hundreds of gallons. Although I think the average household buys 2. We do get some people buy 4. And put them on multiple downspouts. But that answers your question. It kind of depends on the precipitation event.
And we've limited.
Is it like a half inch per 1,000 square feet fills up a barrel, or?
I have an equation. It all depends on the area of roof you're drawing, and then there's a low and a high estimate depending on the rain event. But I'd be happy to follow up with you on that. We did do a calculation for like a standard, or what we were calling like the average 1,500 square foot house. It all really depends. Like at my house, I'm able to draw my entire 900 square foot garage because I get both sides of it. But if you put it under a small area, it'll be different.
Well, I'm just trying to get an idea. So if you get a half inch rainstorm, you can expect it to fill up 1 or 1.5.
Well, that would. I mean, depending on the area, that would.
I guess you have one. You've got your roof is.
Yeah, that would fill all 3 of mine. A half inch rainstorm, drawing that much area.
That helps.
And I can also share with you, we have a model that UVU, a class and professor did for us down there, showing that in Salt Lake City alone, we have the potential, just in the residential sector, to collect about 400 million gallons of water a year. And all that's going to be used on porous landscapes, go back into the aquifer, help recharge groundwater supplies, and water that would have just picked up pollutants and gone right away from the city.
Something worth mentioning, when Mill Creek did this, because we're part of the Stormwater Coalition for our public works, we were able to piggyback and send out to our residents that the $75 barrels were available. So we did promote this already to the Mill Creek team. So
And some Cottonwood Heights residents have purchased them in the past through the county subsidy. So we've now partnered with Salt Lake County 3 times.
That was in May, I believe, right?
Yeah, June was the sale. The sale started in May.
So Franklin, what's your proposal to us then? Is that, what would you like?
Can I ask one
Yeah,
more
please.
question?
Oh, go ahead.
Can you talk a little bit about our aquifers in the valley? Are they in steep decline, or, because I've lived in a lot of places and the tendency is to pull up the water from those aquifers. And I think we're in that same situation here, but I'm not sure.
Most of the water that the Salt Lake Valley is using is surface water collected from a variety of sources. Groundwater is being used to sort of supplement and augment. I think Salt Lake City Public Utilities has a substantial amount of groundwater rights, and I forgot the term they use. I think they call it augmentation. And so they're actually banking water. And so our aquifers, to my knowledge, are in pretty good shape in Salt Lake Valley.
So it's not like what is happening in Nevada, where Las Vegas is pulling from those aquifers, creating potentially a dust storm, and then having that dust end up here through precipitation.
No, Utah's actual groundwater rights and groundwater governance is actually much better than, especially that California is one of the worst. It doesn't actually have a groundwater withdrawal policy, and there's sort of been a groundwater war with farmers across the street from each other, having to continually drill deeper and deeper. So they're in a mess with their aquifers. Fortunately, our water managers have been much more forward thinking about protecting the water. So our water supply, as far as our groundwater, is not jeopardized to my knowledge.
And just adding to that, some of the concern with the program was from people maybe further on the west side of the valley that might have a groundwater well or something and say, well, if you're taking the rain, it's infringing on that. And we haven't been able to find any research that documents that. If anything, widespread rainwater harvesting, because it's used on landscapes primarily, as this is all for, is going to help bolster groundwater supplies rather than just put them into the river system, storm drains straight out.
Shane,
Yeah, I had thought that there was state law on how much rainwater could be collected. Is that,
That's correct. We're limited to 2,500 gallons per parcel at any given time. That's not an annual amount. You can have up to 2,500 gallons.
You can have 50 barrels full.
You could, yeah.
If you take 51,
then you're in
then
serious
you'd be
trouble.
in trouble.
Right, and we urge everyone, we actually provide the link for everybody to register. Really, if you have more than 2 barrels, you're supposed to register with Division of Water Rights. We provide that link to
More
everyone.
than, how many?
More than 2.
More than 100 gallons.
Yeah, and so we actually put it right on the website where they order, and Water Rights told me that was sufficient for them. We've actually heard also from, sorry, did you?
No,
I wasn't trying to interrupt. From some mosquito abatement districts and make sure they're getting everything they wanted. And actually after the Mill Creek one, Salt Lake County has offered to let us give some of their materials out. We're happy to, we definitely don't want to be creating West Nile or having people not
Yeah, so
comply.
that was my next question about mosquito abatement, so your district is okay.
The district's okay because the screens are really small. We were really,
Smaller than mosquito, apparently.
yeah, they're very tiny. I was actually, I was trained in
Smaller than-
microbiology, and that was a big concern when we launched the program. We do recommend that people replace the screens because they will get damaged over time, if there's a hole in it. And the second thing, of course, is to get rid of the water. You don't want to keep the water for like 2 months, right? You're trying to delay the need, but it's not a storage device for long-term consumption. But to come back to your earlier question, just to clear up, there was a law before 2009 in Utah that made rain barrels illegal, which many people remembered. I just wanted to mention that the legislature did change that, and it is illegal now.
Still the #1 question I get.
Yeah, we get it.
People say, oh, in my community we can't, and I said, no, it's state law.
So, do our public utilities, i.e. Salt Lake City Water, do they support the concept? They encourage it? They're opposed to it?
No, rain harvesting is generally widely supported. It's a question of how municipalities want to do it, whether they want to subsidize it or not. So Salt Lake City Public Utilities has their own rain barrel collection, rain barrel distribution program.
Okay, so they're doing the same thing?
They're doing the same thing. They have a different barrel, and they like a more personal response with the buyers. So they want the homeowner to come in and get educated in a workshop, and that's something that they like that direct education. We in that video you saw, we put the rain barrels in people's cars without them even getting out, which is like something that we thought were like, hey, this is really cool and really convenient. But we're like, hey, would you like to come over here and talk to us and let you educate you about water and water conservation? They're like, no, just stuff it in the backseat and I'm out of here.
They gotta come to soccer or something, And part of Salt Lake City's approach is it's tied to their Water Smart audit program, so you have to be part of that. I think they've gotten around a couple hundred barrels out, and we're on a different scale. But all approaches are great. We just want to see more of it done, and that's why we reached out to municipalities to partner with us.
Do you know how long Salt Lake's been running that program?
2 years ago.
And how, you said, I thought you said 8 cities or counties.
Yeah, so that is,
Just list those and what their subsidies were.
So we've done Ogden,
Sandy, Mill Creek, Park City,
Murray,
Summit County, Murray, Eagle Mountain. And is that all? Is that 8? Yeah. So, and then several of them several times. So we've done the county 3 times, Park City and Summit County a couple of times. Mill Creek said they'd like to do it again next year.
Murray's done it 3
Murray,
times.
yeah, Murray did it 3 times until, think about everyone in Murray probably hasn't.
Yeah, Murray was really enthusiastic, and what we see is, so So a municipality that chooses to join the program, purchases the barrels for its residents, and so the money goes directly to the manufacturer. And then we facilitate the distribution and sale and all the questions and all the information about it. And then invariably, as Nick mentioned, we sell out of the barrels. And oftentimes residents are like, but I want more barrels. And so Murray chose, in the first sale, I think 3 times they upped their quantity of subsidized barrels. And I think they did like 600 barrels in the first round. So there's just so much demand.
And in total, we ended up doing like 870 with Murray alone. And Mayor Ryder was just very passionate about it and wanted to extend it out further. They had gotten some funding through a federal grant and things to help. So every city is a little different.
And the typical subsidy is $50 per barrel?
$25 per barrel.
$25 is the subsidy, so that the final price to the homeowner is $50.
No, but you're not the city's fronting the money, so
Yeah, but.
in that case, they're spending 15 grand and expecting to get 10 back over the sale of the barrels.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yes.
The numbers?
That's correct.
For 200?
My calculator goes off on it.
That $75 is still a good price as compared to Amazon. That's a good price.
They're typically like 130 there's retail. Yeah. Because the shipping is so big for 1 barrel.
The only real way to make them cheaper is to make your own, which is like how my wife and I started 10 years ago, and we had the old, it was Swire Coca-Cola barrel that smelled like Country Time lemonade. So you have to have tools and drill them out and
That
everything.
makes some really flavorful zucchini.
It was nice for a while.
So was it legal 10 years ago?
Well, I guess it was. It was right around when it started. I actually didn't become aware of it until there was
Father's Day.
But, what we wanted to do is make it very easy for people, because that's what we routinely heard from people is, oh, I'd love to get into that if it were easier. And that's what we've tried to do by using this barrel.
And the other thing we wanted with this barrel is, and this is sort of me because I live in the suburbs too, we kind of wanted a barrel that sort of screamed that it was the rain barrel. And so, people look at these, like my neighbors, and they don't instinctively know it's a rain barrel. It kind of just sort of fits in, kind of conservative color, so kind of like that. This is the most, and we chose this barrel because it was the most widely used barrel in the country. We wanted something that we weren't going to see again. So it doesn't get the return rate the manufacturer told us is less than 1%, and we have yet to have a return call, somebody saying it's broken.
And what's the quantity in terms of to get that $75 purchase price?
It's really anything you want to do, because we're gonna, if as a city, if you choose to do this and you buy a quantity, then we're able to market it and sell enough of them that they'll send us a truck full of them. Our aim is to try and, get to 500 barrels. But if we bring in other partner municipalities for, like, say, around Earth Day next year, then I would imagine that it might be possible we get to 1,000 barrels to fill a truck, which is ideal.
Yeah, a full truck's around 850. We've had to get a truck and a half for Mill Creek Cell. This year we did about just shy of 700 barrels between Mill Creek and County, and about 365 were subsidized. To give you an idea of how many more we sell.
The last thing we should probably mention is the timing. Our experience has a major influence on how many barrels we sell and how popular it is. Of course, everybody knows to do all your planning by Mother's Day, which I never do. But that's sort of when the biggest demand is sort of, people start thinking about gardening in March and April. And so that's really when we want to launch into it so that we can have them done in May. Would you alter what I just described?
Yeah, we've done them as late as September and August, and there's just, by this April, I'll have a wait list of 100 people that have been calling me since the first rain in March or something. I actually already have people that weren't able to get them this year on the list for next year. So,
Are there other cities considering the same proposal currently?
Mill Creek's interested, Salt Lake County's interested.
Oh, doing it again.
yeah, and then we're reaching out to what we just started doing last year, which seemed helpful for cities working on their budgets, is reaching out and having the meetings in the fall, which I'm just starting. And the year before, or the few years before, we kind of reached out in the spring, and it was just kind of hard to get meetings attended. So we was feedback from some of our partners that come back in the fall next time.
The counties and cities have two different, budget years, so.
But you're anticipating making another purchase with Salt Lake County and Mill Creek, and if we were a little bit conservative in our desire to purchase a number of barrels or subsidize them, we could fall on to somebody else's purchase.
We could partner or collaborate with their order, so to speak.
So
Do you have a
what the-
minimum number that you're?
What we've asked in the past is for cities to do at least 100.
Yeah.
The fewest anyone's done is 150. And we understand that's all depends on the city. If we're partnering and doing a multi-city event, it's less of a concern to us. The rain barrel suppliers, we've have a good relationship with them at this point, and they're not as concerned as what their side. But I think we've really never done less than several hundred.
Further questions, staff?
Should we do it for Mother's Day?
You wanna look about this, look at the budget? I mean, obviously it's not something that's specifically budgeted. So we have to take that into consideration, but,
How do we go on sales?
Still coming?
We could
We
have a
could
booth.
make it where you buy a rain barrel and a history book.
For only $90.
So 100 barrels would be $2,500 if we subsidize those 100, and then 150 would be like $3,250 or something.
Yeah, here's actually, I took the liberty of kind of doing a mock proposed budget. That's just based on 200, but yeah, you're spot on, so I think it's,
I think it ought to start trying for 200.
Oh, you can always do it again, too.
Are you talking about how many you're gonna subsidize, not how many you're gonna sell?
Which is, I'm sorry, if I could just interrupt, that's actually a really important point, because a minimum of subsidy barrels is really important because it draws consumer interest. Even if they run out, people will buy them once they're driven to learn about the product. What we found that we have partnered with cities, they're like, we're not gonna do any subsidized barrels, it's really hard to create consumer demand. So, it's just something to factor.
Is everyone, even the ones that come back multiple times, subsidizing every time?
Yes, everybody's, yep.
and it's a little different. I think the first year we did it, we were offering for $40 a piece, and things went a little too viral, I would say. Like we had 500 hits per hour on the website, 6,000 hits, unique hits in a day, and sold 1,056 barrels. It was, so we actually changed it to 50 so we could spread the subsidy to more residents, and that seems to be kind of in the sweet spot based on our comparison to other sales around the US.
And then tell us about putting the barrels together. You had the video, they were putting them together. Who does that? Is that a city function?
The homeowner puts the barrels together, the construction, I guess, if you wanna call it that, of the kits, it's all self-contained. It takes 2 minutes.
Well, it appeared that you were unpacking them off of pallets in that.
Oh, we do all that.
We do all the work,
So it doesn't require staff time,
No.
city staff time, that's
No,
all.
actually, the providers, the rain barrel folks provide a few, like laborers on the morning of, and then we get a bunch of volunteers.
I love it.
So yeah, we had it all set up before any of the city staff came.
And they purchase it through your website.
They purchase through the website.
It's actually not our website, they set it up for us, and we co-brand it with the city's logos and everything, so it's.
Are there instructional videos and tech support on that
Yeah,
website?
and we give everybody a link to the video, have the link on the website, but really all people need to do is just put the valve in at the bottom, put on the overflow valve, and then cut off their downspout.
That's the hardest thing is the house changing the downspout so that, it curves at the bottom of the ground. Yeah, we just cut it and take that valve and put it right at the barrel.
You do it with tin snips or hacksaw, right?
It's
Yeah,
fine.
even a sharp knife will do it.
But it's.
And I've told a few people who are concerned about it, I'd be happy to come help them, and give them our number at the office, and no one's actually taking me up on it. I don't know if they don't think I'm very handy or what, but.
People love them.
Solutions, website has some very easy instructions.
Well, conceptually,
North Carolina.
conceptually, I would like it. My only question to the council is that, you know, a few other things like this that we've thrown out, and when it's outside the budget process, you know, you want to consider, I mean, it's like sustainability, we talked about, I talked to Dally today, he wants to still pursue that. You know, so $5,000 is $5,000. It's something you can probably absorb in the budget from unspent funds, you know, but it's not a budgeted item. Or we can look at it as we will in the near future, look at the other priorities we outlined previously. Conceptually, I think it's a great idea. I'm in favor of very supportive. It's just the timing and where you want to insert that in the process that we have going. You know, since we just finished the budget and just went through the thing, you want to move on something like this now? You want to put it on a list with the other things? You want to have our sustainability people look at it?
When, in order to meet the purchase date of arriving at where the date is, when would you need a commitment from us?
Really just the day before we're gonna launch the sale is all that really matters. But we can get the website set up in about a day.
Maybe a little
Well,
more.
yeah, okay,
A
but
little more.
what I'm trying to remember
We're
is
used to procrastinating in my office, as you can tell.
no,
It'd be nice, just the thing is, what would be nice to know is planning out the marketing. So if we said maybe the 1st of January, that'd be
because we'll do a press release and, you know, hopefully get
on
quotes
launch.
from elected officials and things like that, which does take a few days off.
Well, as I committed when I met with you with Councilman Bruce, that we would have it here present to the council, the committee will put it on our agenda items that are, we're looking at, and maybe get your response here in the next couple months as we look at all the things again. But conceptually, it makes a lot of sense, and as a city, I think we're more and more looking at things like this, you know, as supporting our environment in a lot of ways. So.
I guess I'll just throw out my
Sure,
support.
please.
It's interesting. One of my graduate school projects was with Ralph Becker on gray water systems. And so it's kind of interesting that you're presenting tonight on rain harvest, because we can't, I don't think we still can do gray water, right? It's still illegal in the state. So I'm fully supportive of it. I think I would like to be viewed in sort of the realm of those other cities as doing something a little bit more interesting. And
I'm supportive too. I just want to know if.
But yeah, I agree. The budget is.
But I think we can find our money too if we want to do it.
Well, let's just, Bryce, let's just put it on the next, just throw it in the next budget amendment. It's small enough that I would say.
So
we had.
Well, let's see how others feel.
Like I said, we were gonna go through our list of priorities and we just stick it on there, so we.
We'll bring that back in this one. Okay.
Well, we
I
appreciate it.
think you can move to uncomfortable.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much for your time tonight, ladies and gentlemen.
So oddly enough, I have your flyer on my desk at home. I was looking at it today.
Oh, really?
So did you approach Wasatch County about this?
We'd love to.
We did last year. We'll try to get ready at I don't remember precisely, but I'm going to give you my card. So.
So Jesse, is Ralph on his way?
Yeah, he is. He'll be here momentarily.
All right, let's do that.
But Shane just called down.
Oh, let's see if I can do that.
Waiting just a minute.
Can you do your
Mr.
budget
Backer
ideas?
started at 6 o'clock, and let's jump down to item 5 on the small cell towers and the proposed ordinance. And Shane, if we can turn it over to you, I read your email of explanation, which is very helpful. The history and where we are.
You got some copies of the proposed ordinance that I'll send around if you interested. all of the council have a chance to review the little explanation I sent out yesterday? Would you like me to? I don't wanna waste time by repeating that you've already read. Are there any questions you want to ask of me? Do we need to go through the ordinance, section by section? What would you like to do?
Maybe you could just summarize again, as you did in your email, and specifically the time restraints you're looking at to get this through, because I think you wanted this on next week.
Next week. Yes, the state law was changed in the last legislative session, and the bill that basically overrides the city's chapter 1983A will go effective September 1st. We have been receiving an increasing number of inquiries from wireless service providers and companies that want to come in and construct these wireless facilities in the public right of way. And so once the new bill goes effective, we need to be able to respond as quickly as possible. I think, Mike, maybe you can correct me, but I think there's probably about 4 in queue, 4 or 5.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Is that right? Mm-hmm. So we would like to be able to move forward with them right after the September 1st effective date of SB 179. This new proposed chapter of the city's code is basically been drafted in consultation and cooperation with a lot of other municipalities. All of the cities are going through this same learning curve and process that we are going through, from Salt Lake City down to the smallest city, and all will have to deal with the possible entry of these small cell wireless facilities into the public right of way, which is a new paradigm for us. And so the state has said that we need to respond. The state has said that these folks have the right to occupy the right of way, and so this proposed chapter is going to provide the legal framework in our city for that to happen. We have taken care to try to have this model the parameters of the new state law and build in as many protections as we can. Be aware, however, that once the right of way is over 60 feet wide, there is not too much that we're going to be able to do about it. We do have some ability to control things in residential areas that have a right of way of 60 feet or less. And so in those areas under this proposed bill, or under this proposed chapter, the providers cannot typically put up new poles. They can put their antenna on existing utility poles or existing city poles, city light poles, traffic poles, things like that. But as far as putting up new poles, that is discouraged, and I think we'll have some discretion to make that pretty difficult to do. Once the right of way is over 60 feet wide, we have very little control over where these poles can go. So that is kind of the brief background of this.
Let me ask, Brad, 60 feet is, that's more than your typical residential street with sidewalks. What about Bengal? Isn't Bengal like 80?
Bengal's probably about 8. Well,
You get to 60, how many lanes of traffic and sidewalks per 80?
Typical section in the neighborhood is 56 feet.
Okay.
Right away.
All right, so your asphalt.
Curb gutter,
Okay.
sidewalk, park strip.
So anything over kind of a standard 2-lane road?
Gets into your 66 to 80 foot right of ways.
What about Nantucket? I mean, because that's a slightly wider.
So, are they required to share?
Yes, there are application fees that they have to pay. These are set by state law, and then there are fees that they pay for use of the right of way, which is also set by state law, and it's 3.5% of their gross revenue So there will be a little bit of revenue. This, is available to us notwithstanding that we have not enacted a telecom tax.
Okay, questions?
This would be part of that fee of the telecom tax.
No, this is a fee under this particular
Okay, all right.
statute, and if we were to enact a telecom tax, it would affect that. But, you have either or, you can piggyback one on the other.
But if you have two wireless providers, are they required to share a pole? Like on the big towers?
We encourage co-location, but, I think what we typically run into with these, providers is they have different technologies and they sometimes don't, like to share. I think that this technology depends on line of sight, and so it's a little bit different.
So if you have a street, there's limits of how many can be on one?
Yeah, the technology is beyond me. We do encourage co-location in the ordinance and, try to make that happen, but, it could be that there could end up to be quite a few of these antennas, these small cell antennas throughout the city over time, as, people have, 2 and 3 different devices that they're using, wireless signal on.
Now, I understand you wrote the orders for us prior to the state writing. Is this?
I did refer back to that because, what we did before was, I think circulated as a model of what cities could do, that cities were trying to respond to the industry and not trying to, we're trying to provide a pathway for them to do this, but, that was not sufficient, apparently to the industry. They, from my perspective, did an end run, went to the legislature, and we have a new law that, preempts anything that the city can do in this arena.
60 feet is in the statute.
What's that?
The 60 feet is in the statute.
Yeah, it's 50 plus 10, I believe.
I mean, for reference, Nantucket's right
Oh,
there.
oh, you mean, I'm sorry, I thought you were talking about height, yes. 60 feet is in the statute, yes.
There's 260 feet in the statute.
Okay, well, so that road width, if you wanna know, I mean, Nantucket's hitting it, so if you just go down Nantucket Road, that is a 60-foot right of way. Could kind of had either side where we either ever had the control on new posts going up or we don't. That's
I
kind
thought
of.
we didn't have any control.
And you were saying it was less than 63, we probably had more where we were seeking to put them on existing poles. If we had a smaller right of way.
Less than 60 foot, but that's what the statute is.
So that would be a good place for if you wanna take a drive and see this is, smaller than this, we're probably gonna be, say, bigger, this or bigger, we could have to do. I mean, there's not a lot of choice, it's a state statute, but that would give you an idea of what
So-
size street 60-foot right of way is.
Then the processing application goes to Mike, to go to you?
Yeah.
Okay. And your
It's,
process is?
it's pretty much an administrative process.
Okay.
And then any franchise agreements would come through the city council.
But there's nothing like Mayor was saying, if somebody, we have 10 companies that wanted to put them on 10 different poles along Union Park,
Danish Road.
Union, whatever, Danish Road, they can do that, there's nothing
Yes.
to tighten it.
The ordinance incorporates this new state law, and we will do all that we can under state law.
Mayor, just for your information, there's one representative from the telecom side, the industry side. If you have technical questions, you can answer. If not, it's fine. And I will just say, the interest we've had, the 4 or 5, are, I think there are a few by the corporate center, but most are out along the road. So that's where
It's like you said, that was Long Highland Drive, that was weedy.
yeah, I haven't talked to anyone about how to drive, but mostly Fort Union and stuff off, but I think that's spread.
There's certainly demand, I mean, that's just something that can grow. I get a little concerned when that 60 foot's a little bit concerning, unfortunately, that's kind of out of our hands. And there was one other, you said that the height is the minimum what it
The height
needs
is
to be.
50 feet plus an additional 10 for antennas.
Well, yeah, it says
And
the
who-
minimum needed for operation, but in no.
And who determines that minimum needed for operation?
I think that,
Do we have somebody we can,
we
Consult if we need to.
presumably can, locate a consultant and, you know, get somebody to review the applications, that comes at a cost, so. I think that a typical utility pole is, 35 or so feet, if memory serves. So if they're just, putting these typically on existing, utility poles, light poles, things like that, well, I assume they would be, as a general rule, below 50 feet, but, that technology is
well, then, Lumby, you said there was someone here from the industry? Okay, typically with cell signals, height is better, because you can get a broader spectrum. Does that change with this type of a radio signal locally, or not so much?
So may I?
You know, you understand what I'm asking, I'm concerned about a 40 or 50 foot pole, a 50 foot pole going
Do you
down.
have some pictures too?
We've seen some pictures, I just
So-
don't know, is the technology that different to where it would make a?
Here's what I'd like to do, if you're interested, and the problem is that, there are some time constraints with regards to getting your ordinance passed. I would be happy to come in and meet with you individually and show you examples of what the small cell node looks like, but the quick and dirty is, what you're used to seeing are 100-foot towers, right? Macro sites is what they're called, or taller. You'll see antennas mounted on the side of the building. So I represent Extenet Systems. We are a neutral host provider. We build networks for all the major carriers. I don't have a single node design that is even 40 feet tall, and that's throughout Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and West Texas. So
your technology tends to work at those heights?
So what we're talking about is where a macro site casts a large umbrella. A small cell node, depending on the size of equipment and the area you're trying to cover, can be as small as 30 feet up to 1,000 feet. Now, does that mean every 1,000 feet our neighborhoods, because I'm a citizen too, is gonna look like a picket fence with these poles? No, they're not. So out of the,
Why is that? Why are you saying now they won't?
well, for one thing, to give you an example, throughout the states that I just mentioned, I've got over 400 small cell nodes I'm working on in 40 plus municipalities. I've got one where 2 carriers have identified the same pole. And the municipality told me it's a horse race. Whoever applies for it first is gonna get it. The other one's gonna have to go somewhere else.
To another pole.
Yeah. So what typically happens though is a radio frequency engineer for company A, whether that's AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile, identifies where they're trying to fill in, or it's called densification. They're trying to fill in coverage to offload that bigger macro site. So it's driven on voice and data volume. And not every carrier identifies the same high volume need. One carrier may have a macro site close that can handle everything, where the other carrier, they're a little further away, so they need a small cell node in this area. But I don't anticipate, are you going to see more of these around? Yeah, if you drive up Big Cottonwood Canyon, you see brown ones going up. And that's a Verizon site that is a small cell node. So depending on size of the equipment, et cetera, will determine coverage. But in a commercial setting,
The antenna?
no, total.
The total.
So that's one of our designs right there.
This is your application.
Yeah, and so, you know, what you see is,
It's a new pole though, it's not existing.
This particular one is.
this particular one is a new pole. And it's fully contained on that one
This
pole.
one's not, this is a Rocky Mountain pole.
Is it? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so, and this is just their
Oh,
submittal, but we
Right.
have a few, oops, sorry. This
one was on Park Center. And this was, proposed to go on top of a city streetlight, so just adding equipment at the base. You know, it's gonna kind of gunk up the pole a little bit, but see the height there is about 30 feet.
So one of the things that I hear from municipalities, common theme is visual minimalization. And, you know, I've seen some pretty ugly poles, and we're trying pretty hard not to do that. So, when and where possible, you know, on a decorative street light, I mean, we're not trying to junk it up. But, again, that's a site that's been identified. We've gone through the process with Mike's department to have all of these reviewed. And like I say, I'd be happy to meet with each of you individually or in a group to show you designs and, you know, what it is that we're working on. For better or worse, we're kind of 11th hour with the ordinance. You know, and what I've tried to do is provide copies of other ordinances, and I'm sure Mr. Topham's worked with all the jurisdictions are in the same boat, and everybody's talking to each other. So if you have some interest.
I think the hard part is that we just get stuck with it, right? So.
Well, a lot of this is dictated by state code, which I get.
They went around the cities.
Well, also looking for.
Probably appreciate your sensitivity to our concerns when it comes to the design and proliferation of those in the community and the kickback we get of what's going on.
So can we add anything here to reduce the visual? I mean, you said that you try to.
So that's one of the things that we will work with Mike on.
But there's nothing we can put in our code.
You know, we have it in there. Everything that can be in there is in
Where
there.
is that?
There's a provision for decorative poles, and there's a provision in that.
What page is that? Sorry.
Page 8. Yeah, I was reading some of them. Under anything like, if it could be a street light, we make it a street light too, if it's in a reasonable place.
Well, let's say for the sake of discussion that we're putting a new pole in, and you say,
Right.
we'd like to have a street light there.
Right.
Do we
It
want
seems
to
like it makes sense
do
to
we
do
want to
both.
work with you to do that? Because it makes sense if, you know, in certain markets, we've had people say, hey, can we put our closed cell TV camera on there? You know, can we, you know, we're talking to UDOT about doing just that, is can we have more than one use for this pole, whether it's our using your pole or you using ours. If you want to put the mounts on to put your banners on to promote a, you know, a activity, some event, you know, we're not opposed to those types of things.
I assume we reserve that right in the ordinance change.
Reserve the right
To multi-use the pole.
No, I don't know that that's in
I
the
think
state code.
it's more,
It's a negotiation.
we can get together and ask nicely and try to
Yeah,
partner.
we've done
Well,
what we
and be
can,
reasonable,
Scott.
yeah.
Well, so from my perspective, I'm working on Sprint and Verizon projects right now. And so what I can tell you is that, again, I'm a citizen, I want to be a good neighbor. So if I'm, you know, if I'm going to do that, that's from a corporate point of view. I don't want to come in here again and have everybody duck under the table and go, God, he's back. You know, I want to have a good ongoing relationship with the city. So if there's something that you say, we could use a street light at that location where you're putting that pole, let's talk about it.
Well, to our advantage, you know, Shane spent a lot of hours on this before the state got it, so we have that expertise, which I think is well represented here. And Mike, if it's administratively, I think you'll be sensitive to our concerns and raise those with us and communicate those with you.
Well, and Mike's been great about helping us through this process that is new to all of us. So I won't take up any more of your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mike knows how to get a hold of me. If, like I say, if any of you want to sit down and go over this more in depth, I'm happy to do it.
We may take you up on it.
Okay. Thank you for your time.
Council, are you?
So.
I understand the urgency.
Yeah, we have to get it. We have to.
So Shane, so like, I know this is a crazy thought, but if we ever wanted to bury power lines, let's just say Utopia came and they were run fiber, we could run our power lines below ground. If it has one of these on it, it's an easement that we would have to replace the pole or something like that. If they did it on a power pole, that power pole, we were looking for it to go underground, we would just have to.
Leave the pole there.
Leave the pole there.
Yeah, this is a different paradigm than our franchise agreements where we have the ability to force the provider to, relocate at their cost if we need to do something else there. So the state has decided that they want this to happen, and so the concept of undergrounding is specifically addressed for example, is specifically addressed in the state code, and it's we can't just willy-nilly require undergrounding of everything that they do. Our ability to require undergrounding is somewhat limited, and it's pretty much constrained to places that we're already requiring undergrounding, and it's assuming that their facilities can be undergrounded and still function properly. So
A little bit difficult in this case.
Some of their stuff simply can't be undergrounded. So.
And reasonably conforms under decorative polling, which is reasonably conforms. What does that mean?
Well, ask the drafter of the state law. That's probably verbatim from the state law. Yeah.
I think in this case, we have a city standard street light. We look for color materials to match. Obviously you do have equipment on the side that doesn't conform exactly to what our street lights look like, but I would say that reasonably conforms. If they were to take down ours and put up a new one, it's gonna have some extra bells and whistles on it.
It wouldn't be a green box.
Right, we'd ask it,
Better. Needs to change it.
Council member, here's the state provision.
I don't doubt you.
If necessary to co-locate a small wireless facility, a wireless provider may replace a decorative pole if the replacement pole reasonably conforms to the design aesthetic of the displaced decorative. So, yeah.
And to this one application's credit, their current submittal was reviewed under the city's ordinance and complies generally with everything in the city's ordinance. So certainly it will comply with this and be well under what that is. That doesn't speak for future applicants and applications, but they've been pretty good so far.
Okay, any further questions? Tuesday's action. Thank you, Shane, appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, we have some honored guests with us. We appreciate it. We have Mr. Ralph Becker, who's Executive Director of Central Wasatch Commission, and Jesse Dean. Have we changed your title yet, Jesse?
Yes,
Deputy Director. Deputy Director, I know we were gonna do that, all right. Come on up to the table.
Where would you like to speak?
Just sit right there, yeah.
Okay. Somebody's glasses?
Thank you.
I recognize them.
Well, as a matter of introductions, I mean, the council's well aware of course, to a degree, a little bit of history of Mountain Accord, and last fall, the creation of Central Wasatch Commission, and again, our city's role and involvement, and obviously deep interest in this geographic area, since we're kind of the city between the two primary canyons, we feel, and I've been able to work with Ralph a little bit over the last few weeks, and been very impressed with his passion and interest and background when it comes to the Central Wasatch, as we're now calling it, and then Jesse Dean, who's our new Deputy Director, was able to be involved in the panel that interviewed him, and very impressed with his background and expertise. So as far as the team that Ralph put together, it's pretty impressive, and we have a lot of work to do. I've asked Ralph if he would come and give this council a little bit of background from how Mountain Accord started to kind of where Central Wasatch is now, and kind of looking forward to where we're going, and where I spend some of my time as mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. So I should tell you, we've been incredibly fortunate that your mayor has devoted an enormous amount of time to this. So excuse him if he isn't doing the city's duties, because he's he's really stepped up and helped get our commission and its effort going, and has played really, I'd say, a critical role in helping shape what we do and how we do it, and hopefully we'll be able to reflect that in the work we do at the staff level. So let me give you, and I'll try to make this brief because I'd like to make sure if there's time that we leave time for whatever you have particular interest in or want to talk about most. But just covering the topics that the mayor described, some background in terms of Mountain Accord and how that led to the Central Wasatch Commission and the work that the commission is doing. Let me tell you that for me, this work started professionally in the mid-1980s when I had just started a consulting firm. This was before the time of Cottonwood Heights, doing planning work, mostly planning and environmental work. And throughout that time, for over 20 years, with that consulting firm, we continuously did work in these canyons. We did Forest Service environmental assessment, environmental impact statement work, everything from the sewer at Big Cottonwood Canyon was one of the first projects that I did for the Forest Service, their environmental assessment, to Brighton's master plan EIS and across the board. We prepared Salt Lake City's first two. They're now involved in a third watershed plan for the canyons. We did the Salt Lake County Canyons master plan in the mid to late 80s. We did Sandy's watershed plan. We've just been involved. I was involved certainly, and we were involved as a firm sort of continuously from the local vantage point, as well as working on a variety of issues for federal agencies doing their work. And that continued until I became mayor. And Salt Lake City obviously has a particular interest in these canyons, owning just about all of the water in these canyons and having watershed protection responsibility, the extraterritorial jurisdiction to protect the watersheds up here. Virtually nothing happens in these canyons without it affecting the watersheds and often water rights. And so Salt Lake City has been actively involved going back well over a century. In fact, really from some of the earliest days of the city's formation in the mid-1800s. The Mountain Accord was really the result of a reaction to the Ski Link proposal. And many of you may remember Ski Link. It was a proposal from then the Canyon Ski Resort, it's now Vail, the Canyon Ski Resort, to link by lift to Solitude. So to come over the ridge of Big Cottonwood Canyon and to link by a series of lifts to Solitude. They were unhappy with the response by the Forest Service to their proposal, and they were able to get our congressional delegation to introduce legislation to sell a corridor of Forest Service land to the ski resorts for that purpose as proposed legislation. They hadn't consulted with, as near as I can tell, virtually anybody locally. And so you can imagine the reaction came from all the jurisdictions that had responsibility in the canyons. This was in 2012, I think. And we reacted vehemently in opposition, and over time that proposal went away. But what I think it prompted for me and for a lot of other local jurisdictions and state agencies and the federal agencies, as well as the ski areas and the environmental groups, the civic groups, was we are getting this, seems like, increasing set of proposals that would really change the Central Wasatch Mountains as we know it, and as almost everybody loves it today. And that if we don't get a handle on what can and should happen in these canyons, then we're going to be just continually involved in these battles and seem like an ongoing war in terms of the major players in the canyons. And it wasn't going to serve anybody well. You'd win some, you'd lose some. Most things would probably never get decided or happen. So that, a number of us started talking about, let's see if we can all come together, all of the major players, and through engaging the public as well, and see if we can arrive at an agreement on the decisions we should be making for these canyons and the mountains, the Wasatch Front and the Wasatch Back, so it included Park City and Summit County. And in the beginning, it also included Wasatch County. Let's see if we can come together and agree on what should happen and make some of the bigger decisions that provide the framework for what should happen going forward. So we all got together, we signed a charter saying here's what we want to try to achieve, and an agreement on how we would operate by consensus, and met and went through a process over 2 years. It was funded by local governments and by the state. Actually, the state put in the bulk of the money to support the work. And over 2 years, we went through a really extensive process involving literally thousands of people, hundreds of stakeholders, divided up into 4 committees around environment, the economics, economic development around transportation and environment. And each of those groups over that period of time and through this kind of process came up with their version of what they would like to see in this part of the Wasatch. They came up with an amazing amount of overlap, but there were significant differences out of those 4 kind of working groups. And there were up to 200 people in each of those groups. I mean, it was a really intensively engaged group, or set of groups. And so we decided to hold a retreat. We went up the homestead for 2 days and basically battled it out, agreeably, but really sort of battled out what should happen. And at the end of those 2 days, came up with a framework or all the major concepts for an agreement. Then over the next few months, that was shared more broadly with the public. And then over the next few months, that was kind of hammered out in writing and agreed to, and led to the signing of the actual accord, Mountain Accord, in July of 2015. So it called for a whole variety of things. It called, I'd say the 2 primary areas of focus in Mountain Accord were, some people thought transportation, addressing the transportation issues was the most important. Other people were more concerned about protecting the quality of the landscape and of the environmental resources and of the recreational uses and the balance of uses. And by the end of that whole process, though, everyone agreed that we needed to do both, but there was actually the focus needed to be on the mountains, and everything else sort of follow in terms of what should happen. So one of the things, for example, that got worked out was, if you were to look at a land ownership map of these mountains, the tops of these mountains are just sprinkled with a mix of public and private property. It's Forest Service ground for the most part. Salt Lake City owns thousands of acres, but most of those are in the northern canyons. And that ownership is the result of old mining claims that became patents. They became patented land, fee land. And Snowbird, for example, is pretty much built on the basis of purchasing a bunch of old mining patents, and that serves as a big part of its base area. But if you look at those areas as well, the mining claims were like 600 feet by 1,500 feet. You could get a whole bunch of them together, but it's not like they were logical blocks of land. And so you end up with this mix. So all of these ski resorts, in their basis, have a mix of public and private land. And it creates enormous problems for them because whether it's financing or whether it's the fact that on doing a building, they have to go to the Forest Service, which isn't in the business of dealing with buildings. They're in the business of managing resources and lands. And so one of the things that got worked out in Mountain Accord was that a lot of the hillside land, particularly outside of the ski areas that were owned by the ski areas, would get exchanged into their base areas, so that that would become private land. And then the areas that most of us use for our recreation and care about, and sometimes we're using private land and we don't even know we're using private land, that would become public. And it would help everybody. It would help the folks who are most interested in protecting those lands, but it would also help the ski areas in having a secure private land base for where most of their facilities are. So those land exchanges were a big part of the outcome. What was also called for, and to help accomplish the exchanges as well as other things, was actually create a new federal designation. And if you've ever been involved in these things, there was as much a battle fought over what the name of that should be, as much as what it was. But it became, as the legislation got developed after the Accord, the Central Wasatch National Conservation and Recreation Area. The fight was over, should it be a conservation area or should it be a recreation area? So you know what happens in these things. It called for federal legislation to create a designation basically from I-80 on the north to the Little Cottonwood Canyon, American Fork Canyon divide, which is also Salt Lake County, Utah County line, on the south, from basically the mouths of these canyons, all the way over to Park City and Summit County, using I-80 as kind of the northern boundary and going over to Quinn's Junction, really on the east side of Park City. So that was, the actual boundaries though follow the ridge, for the designation area, actually follow the ridge lines of Salt Lake County, okay, and I-80 on the north. So that would be created, and then within that, a whole bunch of legislative direction that would carry out the Accord agreement. So everything from protecting private property rights and water rights, to creating some additional wilderness, to removing some wilderness to provide for the Bonneville Shoreline Trail, to remove some wilderness to provide for a corridor for where transportation solutions may be found in the Little Cottonwood Canyon. I could go on and on and on, but there were literally dozens of kind of pieces to this that ended up making up the agreement that everyone said, okay, we get these things done, it will solve a big chunk of the issues that have been tormenting the decision-making in these canyons for decades. And there'll be a security for not only us, but for future generations about what will be protected in these mountains. And on the transportation side, I would say the alternatives got narrowed. There were proposals to build a train from the existing rail line in the middle of the valley, up Little Cottonwood Canyon, tunnel through to Big Cottonwood Canyon, and tunnel through to Park City. There were proposals to have big aerial systems connecting everything up in the tops of the mountains in between here and Park City. There were proposals to widen the roads and somehow provide for a lot more parking. What happened at the end of Mountain Accord was those things got narrowed down to where people agreed, it's like, okay, we're not going to solve problems by providing for more vehicles in these canyons, whether that's because of parking or congestion issues. So we've got to look at transit really as solutions, and then doing things that will reduce the impact of so many vehicles clogging up the roads and avalanches closing Little Cottonwood Canyon 20 times a year, or however many times it is. And then we would spend the time to continue to address the transportation solutions in more detail. So UDOT, as you know, you've been involved, I'm sure, in the EIS. They're doing a Little Cottonwood Canyon. That's sort of the first big step in all of that. And then I guess to go to the last point that the mayor referenced is the federal legislation. So a year after the Mountain Accord was signed, Congressman Chaffetz introduced a bill, and the rest of the delegation signed onto a bill to carry out Mountain Accord. It took quite a bit of time because every time you go to more detail, you're struggling over words. It just takes time for people to get together. So that bill got drafted and introduced. It was too late in that Congress to get it going. And then in the meantime, one of the other parts of Mountain Accord, which was to establish a kind of oversight governing entity, the Central Wasatch Commission became its name, got formed. And of course that took a lot more time and effort than I think people were expecting. But that got established last year. And then, it's taken a while to staff up. So the legislation, though, we decided shortly after I came on board in June to see if we could get some legislation together for Congress this year. We were, they don't like me to use the term invited, but we were just told, hey, if you can bring us some legislation, we'll try to run it and pass it this year. Well, as someone who's been involved in congressional legislation going back to the late 70s, to me that seemed unlikely. But we've been making an effort, actually, to pull legislation together. Building on what was done and introduced by Congressman Chaffetz 2 years ago, but changing players, changing situations, some issues that needed to get resolved without legislation have meant it's taken a fair amount of time. We've had a very, I'd say, active public involvement process. Mayor Peterson has been participating in many of those. We've had a whole variety of issues. Some of them have been addressed, some of them in the process of being addressed. Some of them, I think we're scratching our heads about whether or not they will be addressed and how that will affect moving ahead with legislation. So, for example, the Bonneville Shoreline Trail issue, exactly where that trail corridor will be and how much acreage would come out of wilderness is hotly debated, but everyone's kind of working together, the Forest Service, the trails organizations, and the environmental groups are sort of all trying to come together to sort that out. And they will, because they all want to. They're just debating basically now over how much land gets carved out of wilderness. Whereas another issue like Alta, which signed on, Alta Ski Lifts, which signed on to the Accord and was accepting of the legislation for their land exchange, which would have removed Alta Ski Lifts from Grizzly Gulch, where they own a lot of the private land in Grizzly Gulch. They've decided they really don't want to do that land exchange. Well, you can imagine with as prominent a piece as Grizzly Gulch is, how that's created a bit of an uproar for folks. And so this morning we spent all morning. The third meeting with Alta Ski Lifts and the environmental groups and the Forest Service and the CWC. The chair, Chris McCandless, spent his whole morning on that. And you've been in one of those meetings as well, I know, Mayor. And I'll say we don't have a resolution yet, but the promising thing from my point of view is even though there's some pretty severe disagreements, everyone is still talking. And that's probably about as much as we can hope for at the moment. And hopefully something will come out of it. But all these things are moving ahead, and really the mission of the commission is to play kind of a coordinating role with the various decision makers in the canyons, and then to really carry out what the agreement was in Mountain Accord.
You might just add then a little clarification as to how, just in the short lifespan of Mountain Accord, how the membership has already changed, which is slows down a tiny bit, I think, by adding members.
Yeah, so there were 4, I guess, original members, and then when it first got formed, there were 7 members, and Cottonwood Heights is one of the original 7. It will now grow at the next meeting in September to 10 members. So it's Salt Lake County, Salt Lake City, Sandy, Cottonwood Heights, Mill Creek, the town of Alta, and then on the backs, and the state of Utah that's represented by UDOT, and then on the backside it will be Summit County and Park City.
And then again, if you remember that as a city, each of the 4 original cities have to ratify those coming on, which we've done.
You've already ratified Summit County and Park City. what's the rationale there? Like the boundary line is Salt Lake County, and we're talking about, sounds like most everything west. What was the rationale for including that into the discussion? If we're not talking about transportation and tunnels and things like that.
Well, I'd say 30 or 40 years ago, we wouldn't have talked about including the Wasatch Back, but we now really operate functionally kind of as one region, particularly for the decisions in the mountains. I mean, we share water back and forth, believe it or not, through tunnels going through these mountains. Summit County and Park City. So for example, the Guardsman Pass Road, which was, so one of the things on transportation was, well, should we try to make Guardsman's Pass a year-round road? Which a lot of people would say, yeah. You go over to Park City and those are words, those are fighting words. And for good reason, you come to understand it pretty quickly when you talk to people. But there's no way you could turn Park City, or turn the Guardsman's Pass Road into a regular vehicular road without enormous disturbance to Park City. Because when you come down Marsac, I'm sure all of you know that, you come down Marsac and you think about that road, think about trying to make that a high volume capacity road, and you know, you'd either be ripping out a lot of buildings and probably ground, or you just wouldn't do it. Of course, Park City doesn't want to see that happen to their community. So, you know, really, we're so tied together. You know, when we started on this, we really thought that the sort of mountain transportation system itself, connecting this side and that side, would lead potentially quickly to ways, by tunneling or whatever other ways, to connecting the Wasatch Front and the Wasatch Back. Park City and Summit County, the constituents over there, the citizens over there said, you know, we've got so many traffic problems we have between Kimball Junction and Park City. We want to see those taken care of first, so we'll put that off, you know, for another day. On the other hand, they view as critical their connection to our side of the mountains as well in terms of their use. You know, their citizens, you know, they don't just stop at Park City and Deer Valley. They use this side, and it's played even into the land exchanges and the lands, because it's pretty different on the Summit County side. It's almost all private land. It's not public land like we have on this side of the mountain. But there's a several hundred acre piece that is Forest Service land, and the ski area wants to, it's up near the top of the monitors, if that makes any sense to some of you. And the ski areas sort of look at that as potential ski area expansion. And Summit County and Park City are going no, because if the expansion were to occur there, they would lose what's left of their more dispersed recreation terrain, the side and ski areas. So to them, you know, they look at it as I think we do, as we're one region when it comes to these mountains, and so everyone's kind of agreed to try to work together.
But to be frank, early on discussions outside Mountain Ford, there was hesitation with adding additional. There definitely was hesitation. When you look at the original interlocal, I think they even restricted it. Shane can correct me. But then when the petitions came to the commission and the debate went on, that they had support to move that direction. So, and Andy from Park City, there was some compromise there as they met with Summit County, and it impacts all of us.
I guess from my perspective, as you consider adding members, I think it would be nice to hear about those members, because like I think I said to the mayor of Alta, from my district, just so you know where I'm coming from, my district is Wasatch Boulevard. And so I'm keenly aware of what my constituents want, which is transportation. We don't want to see a 4-lane highway, because I think it ruins the character of our community. It creates, as Andy Bierman would say, you know, lots of tailpipe emissions. And so I hope that those that are joining understand that we are a community and know those are our concerns. And so we don't wanna see a bunch of people coming from Park City and interested in getting here faster. And the ski areas also, I think, are very much interested in seeing how many people can get up there as often as they want during a day. So they want me to go up at 2 and come back, or actually come up at 8 for the powder, go back for lunch and come up again. They're welcoming that kind of behavior. And I think from my perspective, we want to be sure that those that enter have similar thought processes to us. I'm speaking for myself, but I think I might be speaking for other members of the council. So.
Absolutely, I concur wholeheartedly. And that's why I asked Ralph to be here, because I want our council to realize that I'm your representative there as well. And again, with my professional background, I have a personal interest historically and professionally, and I want to make sure that that's represented as we work through this with them. And,
So have you felt, I mean, we've been involved regularly and have a role, as you do, I think, in the Little Cottonwood Canyon EIS, which of course includes, at least for Big Cottonwood Canyon, over.
it starts primarily with Little Cottonwood Canyon down around to the mouth of Big Cottonwood.
Do you feel that that EIS has been accessible and you've been able to get input and participate in that? Because that's going to play a big role, obviously, in what happens all the way along Wasatch Boulevard with what they do there. So.
Well, we have staff that meet with John Thomas every other week.
Yep, every 2 weeks. So, at this point of the study, yeah, they've been very accessible, very open. As the study moves along and as that budget only goes so far, we're gonna see where the priorities really are, but at this point, yeah, they've been willing to talk, willing to think outside the box a little bit to consider some of these ideas that maybe they wouldn't normally. So it's encouraging at the beginning, but we also understand we're at the beginning of the study.
But not just UDOT too, but Salt Lake County as well. With their master planning of the canyons and this area, and we have concern about protecting the corridor, just not just a parking lot, asphalt jungle all the way along. So looking at some regional things and also we have other canyons like Estimus Canyon and where we want appropriate access to those. So that's why we're very interested in the process and being involved as you are. Yeah.
Well, if we can be helpful, I think we kind of see our role on the commission and certainly as staff to the commission to help mold the kind of approach that was taken in Mount McCord and that we see the commission taking to reflect people's views. That doesn't mean everybody's happy. I know you all know that really well.
It seems like every meeting we have with Central Wasatch is much like our public hearing last week. We've got a lot of private property owners who have some personal interests of a whole variety of issues.
So in terms of the federal legislation that you're working on, is that maybe narrower in scope than it originally was, or is it still just as big as that?
I'd say it's just as big. I'd say the big piece that's a question, relatively speaking, is whether or not the Alta Land Exchange is part of it. And I think everyone wants it to be part of it, including Alta Sea Lips. But there certainly is an agreement on what that looks like at this point. So, I mean, at some point there may need to be a call by the commission on whether or not they go, you know what, we're going to leave that part of it for another day, and
we'll try and keep it in.
And see if we can
back to them. But if they finally say no way, then.
Because I just look at personally from Cottonwood Heights' perspective, we have a large percentage of our constituent, or at least in the trails community, that would like to see the Bonneville Shoreline Trail be connected. It's a high priority, and so I always, when I think about ginormous legislation with lots of, that is included among other things, and there's lots of trading going around, it's just, to me, I think, gosh, that won't be part of my legacy if I'm in this position for 4 years. That concerns me. So has there been any thought to potentially, if whatever happens with Alta, would you consider looking at something smaller, that's something, maybe a smaller, a big win, but just something more narrow, or is that?
You know, I guess that's a thought that the commission could look at some point. Right now, I think the commission's expressed itself that it wants to get this package done. That it's sort of a once-in-a-generation sort of opportunity to try to address a lot of issues, Bonneville Shoreline Trail obviously being one of them at
And
this
that's
point.
within that package, we articulate about Bonneville Shoreline almost in every meeting somewhere. Even executive committee, that's always a high priority, that's one of my priorities.
My guess is you almost couldn't do just something like Bonneville Shoreline Trail, because there are at least a dozen I could rattle off to you, Bonneville Shoreline Trail like issues that would resolve something of real significance in the canyons that have varying degrees of unanimity. But I'd say almost all of the participants and all of the jurisdictions to date have said, we need all of these pieces to fit together to make the individual pieces work. So for example, if you were to say, well, we'll just create the Mount Olympus Wilderness Area, that would make the environmental community very happy, who's been pursuing that for decades. But it would probably make the ski areas probably unhappy, not because they care whether or not that becomes wilderness so much, but because that's one more thing that makes it more difficult for them to get their issues resolved. I mean, this has really been sort of a balancing act, which happens with legislation, I think, a lot of times, where there are people who really want certain things as a high priority, and they're willing to give up something that is of lesser importance in exchange, recognizing it's really important to somebody else. And so while Bonneville Shoreline Trail is obviously the #1 objective for the Utah Trails Association and the Salt Lake Valley Trails Association, and probably thousands and thousands of users of the Bonneville Shoreline Trail and the jurisdictions around it, it would be hard to pluck that out and not find a lot of opposition from people who are going, this doesn't do anything for me. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, that's sort of where things are today by my assessment.
So based on your assessment, what do you think the chances of pulling this legislation together and bringing it before Congress this year are?
Oh, about 2%. I would have said, a month ago, I would have said 20 or 30%. But, time is on our side.
And there's no dollars connected to this, so it's just merely land swaps and boundary changes. And because you mentioned transportation and transit, I just wasn't sure what.
Well, indirectly, there's dollars, I think, connected in lots of areas, just when you start talking transportation, and even if there's additional, you would understand better than I, but if legislation was adopted federally, then there are certain expectations on the federal government that they have to check.
Well, and the land exchanges are authorized in the legislation, but it's up in terms of the process where they have to do valuations in terms of the land swaps.
Value for value,
And until that happens, any of the ski areas or any of the folks involved in the land exchanges reserve the right to remove themselves from the process.
Yeah, so the most recent draft of legislation would also have an authorization for appropriation. So what usually happens with a new land designation is there'll be some additional appropriations to support this new area. But so far, the funding has been coming from the state for all the transportation improvements. And, it would make sense, and I know a lot of people are thinking about going after federal money. Having this legislation would probably help that.
But also Salt Lake County we only are looking at additional monies for a variety of supplemental pieces to this. We're starting to emphasize more on trails themselves and things like that. So this conversation creates more interest and more synergy. We need to keep the momentum going.
Well, and as all of you know, too, there's this tolling
Tolling
legislation was passed this year, and
The state, yeah.
that looks like a, you know, possible, maybe even probable outcome of the Little Cottonwood Canyon EIS, and that would produce a new stream of revenue, and so.
We have an example in Mill Creek where they've done it for 20 years on a smaller scale, and it's worked, and it's made improvements, so.
What would be, if I could put you both on the spot, what would be your vision for the solution to Little Cottonwood Canyon and the parking, or the parking and or the traffic issues?
I'm a great believer in the public process. No, actually, I really am. I mean, I say that laughingly a little bit, but I really think that, and I think UDOT is doing a good job thus far in really engaging people and thinking about alternatives and thinking outside of the box, particularly by UDOT standards, those of us who've worked with them before. I really do think you tend to get the best results when you go through that, because things that, you know, I might think about personally, or others might think about personally, may or may not be the best approach in the end. I mean, I was really surprised when Park City said they didn't want to be connected to Big and Little Cottonwood Canyons. And the leadership was surprised over there. But that was an outcome, you know, I've probably had a half a dozen meetings, you probably had more than that even, with John Thomas and with his group of folks in-house and their consultants. And they're doing an impressive job of looking at a combination of things without an enormous amount of disturbance that could make a big difference. That's my impression.
Well, we'll just plant a seed with you right now. Our position, unless somebody corrects me, is, you know, looking at Wasatch Boulevard is keeping that corridor sensitive to, one, the residents is one thing that's critical, so they get up and down Wasatch Boulevard. Also not clogging up that corridor with a lot of little parking issues. I think we're more in favor of maybe something regional. And to be frank, you know, the gravel pit area for us is one option. We do support some trailheads, strategically located for accessibility, some of those canyons, but it's all fits within the mission of Central Wasatch as well.
And I would echo what you had said. My experience with John Thomas has been exceptional, and he's had community meetings where, I don't know what we call ourselves, but members of the community have gone and shared our thoughts with him, and I think it's shown up in the EIS, but there's always the worry that, okay, it's there, but what will the end product really look like?
And that comes from experience of other processes like that, where all of a sudden you have the input and also you see the final product and go, wow, that's different than we thought about that. So that, he seems very straightforward, sincere.
But ultimately, it'll be the UDOT director and the Transportation Commission, right? That'll make those decisions, so, yeah.
That could be your next board.
Yeah.
Yeah. We are gonna meet as a commission, we're gonna meet with the Utah Department of Transportation, I think at the end of next month.
Yeah, and the county has a transportation committee. It's, we're putting members on that this week, I think. And there's a chance I will be appointed to that as well.
But I think from my perspective, thinking about Wasatch Boulevard as an artery for bikers and mass transit buses and cars, like, how do you create something that in 30 years, if we have these autonomous vehicles, and that we're not building for all these cars that we believe are gonna come, we're building for the future of what it could be with bikes and buses and cars, and I'm thanking you both for coming, but also I would personally like to leave you with my vision and maybe others' visions of what we hope that we will see, and I think the more people that we can get into our little bubble and start speaking like us in the world in Salt Lake City, the better off we'll be. So thanks for letting me stay on my soapbox for a minute.
Well, I think the more you and others are involved, the better the outcome is gonna be, and more responsibility.
Well, and kudos to Ralph and Jesse on the team, but they've been very open-minded as far as encouraging that communication. I've been very impressed, and not to patronize, with those who daily are communicating their concerns and issues, and they're always listened to, yeah.
I got to spend my last 2 hours before this meeting responding to a grandma request.
Yeah.
At least it was only 2 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, this is just the beginning.
We've taken a lot of Ralph's time. Any questions about CWC and the process and what's happening? And I thought, this summary would give you a good foundation, and I'll try and keep you informed as we progress. A couple other key points, which I think you're aware of, is that it's a small staff. We have these two gentlemen and then one other.
Yeah, our communications director, Lindsay.
Communications director and everything else is, we have an attorney on contract and a fiscal person on contract and a few other things. A website is coming and things like that. All of the CWC meetings, the formal meetings are held here in our building, which is great venue.
Thank you for hosting us. I know you need more excitement on certain days of the
It's like
month.
the time, and it works well.
And we've got this fancy new system, maybe you can incorporate.
Oh, we could, yeah. So,
You can have your meetings live.
yeah.
Actually, it's been asked, so it's one of the things we need to.
Another thing for me to add.
Will you put that on your list, Jeff?
Sure, I don't have anything else.
But I think you could probably just use this, right, and tee it up to.
Sure.
That's an easy thing to do, yeah. Right, any other questions? If not, thank you. Jesse, any comments? No, you're new, you've been on it a month now?
I was just gonna mention, I mean, in terms of collaboration, getting more people involved, that's really why we need these tools like our website and all these other things built. But I think as staff, we're really excited about all these different opportunities. Lindsay and myself are new to, we've watched Mountain Accord from afar and love the Wasatch, but haven't had the opportunity to actually dive into the issues. So I think that we're approaching it from kind of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and excited to get into this issue. But I think that there's a lot of different opportunities we can partner with the city, but also a city of Cottonwood Heights, but there's other people that we really want to get involved and make sure that we're incorporating our work and providing some good advice where we can.
Jess, you want to take 2 minutes and tell the group your background just a little bit?
Sure, I mean, if you guys really are
No, it's 2 minutes. Yeah.
slow evening, okay.
No, it's not. I'm gonna have out of here by 8 o'clock. I'll be glad.
So I think
You
this
keep
is.
saying that, and we usually get home on Wednesday.
It's my fault.
So
It usually is.
this is my 7th day on the job, officially, I think. But I was born and raised in Salt Lake City. Started skiing at Alta Ski Area when I was about 3 years old, and then we really learned to love the Wasatch Backcountry as a teenager. But I've spent a lot of my time on a personal level playing in the mountains. I went to school in University of Wisconsin-Madison. I left and then decided to come immediately back because I didn't realize that Wisconsin was as flat as it is. And as a skier, it's a challenge for me. And I originally, I actually first met then Mayor Becker as an intern for the Salt Lake City Mayor's office in 2010, and was charged with working on some Eccles Theater outreach. I've then met my last current boss, which was Jason Mathis with the Downtown Alliance, and I worked in urban policy issues for the last 7 years. Downtown Alliance, it's actually, I sort of used this as an example in my interview. I don't know if it's fully accurate, but it's a similar it's a similar organization in some functions as Central Wasatch Commission, although it's a nonprofit. It really functions as this nexus between public and private sectors, really trying to build a greater, more dynamic downtown. Clearly, downtowns are not the Wasatch, but there's still this spirit of collaboration that I think my experience really speaks to from the last 7 years, and that's what I'm hoping to do with the CWC. So, brief introduction.
No, I appreciate it, and I think that's valuable because I was very impressed and wanted to find not just the right talent, but the right fit for the staff when it's such a small staff, and Jesse fits in well, so welcome. Okay, any questions? Let you guys know of your families. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Look forward to seeing you again.
Ralph, did we set a date on the retreat?
I think we just did, we're waiting for one more member who can't make it that day, but yes, the October 19th or 20th, 19th.
Right, thank you. Does anybody need a break, or we want to rush through this?
One more
final
thing in
hour?
the order.
We're almost done, okay. Moving back to city council and staff reports. Bicycle lane options, Wasatch, Florida.
You
Tell me where.
So, Mayor and Council, you asked us to go back and look at Wasatch over there in front of Giverny. There's some issues about the shoulder and bicycles on the south or the east side, whichever way you're kind of going down Wasatch, I guess. So we've taken a look at it. Brad has some information here, but just right out of the gate, I want to say the easy one to deal with. As part of the process with Giverny, they were required to put in a certain amount of asphalt, and during the inspection process, which has been ongoing, and also with some calls that have come in after some concerns, we took a little closer look at Wasatch. They do owe us 4 more feet of asphalt on that side of the road. So that in effect will give us a 4-foot shoulder through Wasatch, which would be plenty of space for a bicycle at this time until the property's developed. They are under bond for that, and they are under approved drawings for that, so we sent them the letter today and spoke to them and let them know.
So from where to where?
Do you have a pointer?
You have a pointer?
I do. You have to use that one.
Okay, well, you can just-
Here.
I think I was trying to see.
Yeah, so in front of that guardrail and down through that area.
He's up there.
So, go ahead. Anywhere the Giverny
Zoom out.
project is affected. So all through there. So they owe us that.
4 feet on
The west side.
West side.
Not
Go ahead, my
a
turn.
maximum of 4 feet. It varies. The striping's
East side.
pushed over a little.
So they'll owe us that next to the guardrail through that area. So that section is in fact
That's the worst.
yes and no. Yeah, there's a couple of sections that it's right up on it, but we're working on that, and before they're done, we'll have that put in, as per the agreement and the drawings and that. Now, the other section that we've talked about, and you have another slide, or
Sorry,
you're just gonna
one
bring it
question, when you said when they're done,
We've
what's their
we've
time?
instructed them, they want them to start in the next week or two,
Oh,
putting it in, because this is an issue. Yeah, so we've told them we want them to get started in the next week or two. If they don't, we'll probably have to do some arm wrestling or play a little hardball.
Then assuming if we have an additional maximum of 4 feet, then we can then adjust the bike lane and stuff like that.
Well, that'll give enough space on that side for the bikes to travel. It's the actual width of a normal bike lane anyway, if we were to stripe it. We did not require them to stripe a bike lane on that side, but they were required to have that 4-foot shoulder. Does that make sense?
Once they pave it, will we stripe it?
Well, it'll be striped with the white stripe. It'll be a shoulder.
you just have to add a little bike.
You do need a little asphalt to make.
Can we add another white line in it?
No, it's not enough room for another white line, no.
It'll be wider than that.
Yeah, it'll be a shoulder. Where before it was a 2-foot shoulder, we're gonna make it a 4-foot shoulder.
No, I was surprised when I was riding down Holiday Boulevard. I used to do my cross train, take my bike out for all the time. I did not realize it doesn't have a bike lane. I always figured it does because the shoulder's so wide. It doesn't.
Yeah, some places have them and some, no, there's not enough room to stripe a bike lane and then add
Yeah.
but the shoulder itself, I mean, that means we would have to put a stripe on the edge of the asphalt, which doesn't make a lot
Is
of.
what you're saying just a little symbol of a bike?
That's what I was
Yes.
suggesting.
Put the
I don't know if
stencil.
we dropped them on there or not.
The speed is too high to do shared. No, in particular area.
Can you
But it's
stripe
not a
the
designated
shoulder
bike
as
lane.
with a little bike icon in the shoulder area?
Can you do that if it's not designated as a bike lane?
We could if we had another foot.
Can't you make it stand
Yeah,
taller,
shrink
or
the
it's
logo,
big?
come on.
Yeah.
We'll make it work. The 4 feet is twice what was out there
And I think
originally,
it
so.
wasn't a designated bike lane pre-Giverny, it was just a wide shoulder before as well.
Well, how would you designate that?
Well, to be a designated bike lane, you've got your engineering standards, it has to be X feet, meet X dimensions, and just put a symbol in there.
That's probably what Brad's talking
Not to
about.
say you can't use the shoulder as a bike lane, like most be.
But also raise another question, I'll give out subject, when we start talking about active transportation, park trails and open space committee, is start looking at places and going after money for active transportation corridors. There are, we'll have the county, they have a small part every year they allocate. So we'll start looking at those things and get some more connectivity with that. At least get that shoulder back, which was the big thing there, but I think, if I remember from calls we got and you got.
Yeah, it'll get the shoulder back plus some.
Where they're doing the 4 feet anyway, could we pitch in and do 5 feet and get the designated?
There's not enough room. This shit drops off. There's a guardrail right there and it kind of drops off.
But as a biker,
And we don't own the property, I mean, the properties also.
having 4 feet there on that shoulder, is not bad.
Big difference. It'll be much better than it was before.
But again, I think we need to not lose that whole perspective of bike lanes everywhere. And we start planning for it.
Okay, so the other section is a little further to the north, in front of the apartments. So Brad knows a little bit more about this as far as the sizes are concerned. So if you want to address our thoughts on that.
So Wausau's right in that area is a 2-lane road going back and forth. This development's adding 1,690 cars a day to this roughly 10,000, 11,000 cars that are already here. The capacity of a road is close to the capacity, which is about 13,000. If you have a center turn lane all the way, it increases the capacity of the road to roughly. And our traffic engineer that had reviewed this was that they put in a center turn lane all the way up to the intersection here to help facilitate traffic movement with the other in the area.
The suicide lane?
So there's a center turn lane, suicide lane, that whole distance. When they came in and striped this, they're supposed to do an 11-foot length, bike lane, 11-foot lane, 11-foot center turn lane, another 11-foot lane, and then leave a 5-foot shoulder on this east side.
You say they.
They meaning Giverny.
We're supposed to.
Developers.
Correct.
And we didn't find, should we have known sooner, we just found out now, or?
Well, we went out and measured that, just right after we talked shortly, and come to find out, they just made an extremely wide center turn lane. They didn't stripe it per plan.
So the width is there, but the striping is
Correct.
inadequate for the.
We need to
So
adjust the
that's just
striping.
simply, they just need to go out and restripe it.
So is that in the same letter, or?
That will be, yeah, it'll be the, and then that'll give shoulders on both sides of the road going all the way through. I mean, there were 2 options. We can take out the center lane, and that was tossed out there as an idea, but just shrinking the center, the suicide lane gives us the space we would need.
But now if somebody wanted to develop the land to the south of the condos, with that turning lane, there's the capacity to do that up to 16,000?
16,000
cars a
They
day.
would have to widen their portion of the road through there, yeah.
But they could accommodate it based on the traffic.
Probably. Yeah, I mean, Giverny is adding 1,600, you're saying, because it's about 10 cars per house, that's a fairly giving number. I mean, that's the high end, but that's what you can expect. So if you have another 100 units going, yeah, another 1,000 cars, trips per day.
So by adding that lane though, we've essentially given the right to have high-def development there.
It depends on where their
You-
access is and
the-
how they.
From a purely traffic standpoint, yes.
Yeah, without having to do other improvements except for.
Okay, yeah. Well, we have to deal with the planning commission and the zoning and everything.
So these
we've got-
issues will be taken care of this next week or 2.
Does that get us all the way to the?
That takes us all the way to the
concerns?
city boundary.
Thank you.
Yeah, let us know how they respond.
We will.
Can I, this is related. I never, it's just, it keeps coming up about this, that center turn lane. And as I've been driving around, I've noticed it's really common for those to just be It's like they're all over the place in width. They, enormous ones. You just, is the standard practice then you work from the edges of the asphalt always in? Because it seems to me that that's a place where you'd stick the thing in there, you'd make it one size, and then you'd work out. Is that where I've always misunderstood the way striping is supposed to happen?
If you're designing a bike corridor and you want a continuous bike path, generally you'll start from the outside and then work in, and then the center turn lane is going to vary in width. If you're disregarding bike design, you sometimes will just go in and design a center turn lane and then move out and then have varying.
So that varies project to project.
Depends on your priority on that road. What's your goal for that road?
It just seems like it's that really.
So there's a safety aspect if a cyclist is continually.
Yeah, I mean, on Fort Union, they've been all over. It first popped up, at least on my radar, when we did Bengal, and it was just like, this just seems crazy, so I guess we'll just look more carefully at striping when we get into these projects in the future.
Any questions on that?
No, Matt,
We'll report
thank you.
back.
Thank you for going to look at that.
We'll report back on the conversations with them and where we are. And like I said, knock on wood, they'll move forward. But if we don't see any movement in the next 2 weeks, we'll have to do,
Okay.
we'll go from there.
So, sorry. I was just gonna say, will you respond to, is it Mary? She had been, I thought she had met with you all, and then she's been emailing me, I just wanna make sure that I'm not.
Somebody's communicating back.
Granite Community Council?
Oh, yeah.
Mary Young?
Mary.
On the bike lane issue, I can send her an email.
That's fine.
Right, any questions on that subject? Okay, any other council or staff report items?
Quick thing there.
Okay, we'll look back.
The first Tuesday in October, Historic Society would like to do dinner with us.
Oh, yeah.
And I kind of volunteered us to provide the food. Said we normally eat on Tuesdays anyway. But,
Do they have a location? Because they've usually done it offsite.
yeah, it would be outside.
It'd be at the bridge behind West Spencer's Pond. I thought they sent something to all of us. Did everybody get that email?
I just don't.
Oh, you sent it. To all of us.
I remember this talking about the day.
That's October 2nd.
Yeah.
Is everybody good with that?
Yeah, I mean, you're good our regular meetings. So.
So what does that mean for our regular meeting? It's just in place in the web?
Well, no, we're just-
I don't care. We do like we're doing the dinner with the mayor and the others where we just have that, and then if we've got more to discuss, we'll come back here.
It's the first Tuesday, and we meet there, and then as we get closer, if we have enough work session items, we'll do that when we come back. If not, that'll be our meeting. We've done it every fall for the last 4 or 5 years.
Not usually on a Tuesday, though.
No, it's been
That's unusual to do it on the same night.
My apologies, on a Thursday. No, it's not, I'm sorry.
No, it is a
The
Tuesday.
second is a Tuesday.
Yeah.
That's unusual for us to do it on a Tuesday.
Yeah, we've done it an extra night, but.
No, it is Tuesday.
Do you want to hold a meeting, or do you just want to do the dinner with them?
Well, I think I'm fine with accommodating them, and then plan on not having a meeting, but if issues come up, then we have to leave that open for, if we have to. At that time, we won't be very long.
That'd be cool. Depends on the week.
So, if I understand, do you need to make arrangements then for putting it all together, or do they make?
Just whatever we would normally do here.
Whatever we normally do, plus the night.
I will work with Gayla and Janice to get that lined up and get some options worked out.
Just coordinate with Tally and then Tally.
Tables and everything out there then?
Out there, have to look at it, there's not a lot.
I'll send you an email after this.
Well, it's their event, so whatever they.
Well,
There's a little bit of facility up there, but there's not a whole lot.
There's the parking, the parking lot right there, there used to be a couple of tables over
Yeah,
there.
there wasn't a whole bunch, right?
And, we had.
Usually a pretty good sized group.
Yeah, they have 8 or 10 themselves.
It's gonna snow.
Okay.
Starts at 5?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and, Matt, did I see you nodding? You had
Oh,
something?
yeah, just, I can't remember if it's in the report or not. Starting the 29th, we'll be chip sealing 3,500 in Greenfield and 27th, the upper end, the top, the lower end.
3,500 Greenfield.
And then 27th from Butler up to Bengal. Yeah,
So he's
just,
gonna do that between school getting in and lunch.
It's pretty quick.
we're shooting for it.
I know,
So,
he keeps correcting.
just be aware, them signs will be going up. And yes, we are striping bicycle lanes on 35th.
I'm not looking at you.
So we get 35th from the,
You know where to answer the question.
Yeah, I just answered it now.
Just down the Wasatch.
Missed to Wasatch. Yeah, it got dead ends on the, and it's narrow on the other way.
Perfect location for bus
Okay,
Okay.
just FYI.
Robbie?
Just, I had it in the calendar, but don't forget, a week from tomorrow is the event of the year, so,
Okay, that's the,
If I RSVP to the invite, am I good or do I need to make a phone call?
no, you're guaranteed a seat.
okay, it's on Market Street, so it's,
We'll have filet and cedar, cooked salmon, and it's gonna be a great event, and we have a guest speaker, I guess I can tell you who it is, it's Robert Kirby.
Oh, great.
If you haven't heard him, you're missing out. If you're like flying to Colorado or something, I don't know. But so you come for the first few minutes, and I'll give you a lights and siren escort to the airport. How about that?
Wow. But you have to ask.
He's awesome.
I thought you were say you would.
I'm good at TSA.
We've had some great speakers.
No, you've done, that is always.
We have had great speakers. He did our first one. And now that we've hit our
To me,
decade.
what really the highlight is for the officers.
No, I should say, as good as the speakers have been,
It's the officers.
it's always hearing what's been going on and some of the words you give out flying.
Recognizing that
That's-
and then hearing of our support and thanking them and stuff, that's what
Yeah.
it's all about.
Kirby's a former officer.
Yeah.
He sure is.
Yeah.
He writes funny stuff.
If you've never seen him in person, he'll kill you. Yeah, he's great.
Okay.
Anyway, please come if you can.
Thank you, Frank.
We're excited to do that, so. We asked him to take special advantage of Mr. Parks, but I hope he does that.
Being
I can't
a
be
former
doing
12
that.
police
I
officer,
fly.
being a former 12
Yeah.
police officer.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it was Kirby and Tula as well?
Isn't that where he
was
started?
served as I thought he was.
No, I don't think it's
Oh,
The chief in Twilla right now is Kirby, but.
a different guy.
I think he was in Springville or something.
Anyway,
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to question staffing, how we doing?
3 in the academy, trying to get a 4th. You know, again, this is week 2. I got 30 plus more weeks before I see them in the car, so yeah, we'll get there. I've talked to other chiefs at some social events, and we're all kind of in the same boat. We're gonna have to just buckle down and grow our own. The laterals aren't working very well, so everyone has the same
Changing
problem.
problems with that.
Yeah, you are. Someone's running from discipline or whatever, and I don't want to teach them our way to do business, so. We'll be okay. The guys work, they do whatever, they work extra, they come in early, they're doing business.
Chief Watson, a tough week, so maybe you can give us a little bit how the event went yesterday, I mean.
Yeah, sure, thank you. The incident management team did a wonderful job, and the ceremony went quite well. Logistically, it was a pretty major task, but it was really nice, and the family was appreciative that they didn't have to deal with all of that, and they could do their parts of it, but didn't have to be responsible for something so huge. A line of duty death is just a completely different thing. But we had firefighters in from all over the country, including the crew that was with him.
It's interesting, on national news last night, I was talking about firefighters across the country, and it spent a lot of time of how many of them went the extra mile to benefit the residents who were losing homes. And one fireman got there and watered this guy's garden for 5 days and left him a note, kept it alive until he came out. All kinds of amazing little things that these firefighters did for those residents of California.
Yeah, we're particularly having a hard time processing this because Matty was one of the best. He was the one that kept everybody else safe. And
sounds like such a funny guy. I was reading the article last night. He was a funny guy.
yeah, he was special.
Yeah.
What was
that's
it,
good.
Hell No?
Yeah. Hell no, sir.
If you all haven't read it, there's a really great article that we're referring to in the Tribune that Chief Watson is quoted in.
We worked closely together for 4 years in particular in the Wildland Bureau, and spent many a night in the dirt in a sleeping bag, and he was just awesome. He was, in his early 20s, he was responsible for hiring, training, and fighting fire with a crew of 18 to 20 seasonal firefighters, and that will just give you a taste of how special he was.
Also pass on our appreciation to Chief Peterson. I mean, he took it on his own to come to our open house last week, which means a lot.
Very nice. Yeah, you bet.
We appreciate having him here.
He
Appreciate everyone's help that night.
I'll sure let him know, thanks. And he did something, pulled something off yesterday that I'm still mind-boggled by, and he just put out through the network a request for fire departments to help us out so folks who were on shift could attend if they wanted to. And we had 99 firefighters from 27 different fire departments here yesterday taking calls so that our folks could be at the services. And Assistant Chief Higgs over operations actually covered one of the battalion chief positions just to make sure everything was going well. And I'll tell you what, those agencies did a wonderful job. There were no glitches, there were no breaks in service. And we've never done that before. That's the first time we've offered that to on-duty crew, so it's pretty amazing that we had that kind of response.
Thank you for updating and sharing that with us. Anyone else? Mike?
Just one thing really quickly, I'd like to get it out on the calendar, but we have scheduled just some residents have been requesting more information on the PDD and how it does. It's a start, but we've scheduled just open office hours for next Thursday from any time between 11 and 8. Nothing formal, but we'll be available. If people want to come in and ask questions and learn more. We've posted an article on the website. We'll just be here to answer questions if people want to come in and engage. I know some of it's during business hours, but we're trying to keep it open until 8. It's not going out to everyone's house for an hour, but given the staff constraints, it'll probably just be me sitting there. We'll be here. So if you get calls about it and want to help spread the word, we're trying to help people understand what this is, and we'll continue to do that.
Is that on the rolling bar of the website, or are we still having trouble with the, I know you said
No,
that they're.
it's not there, but I'm kind of, we need to move it, so. We got some other things to move off of there, and they're about to go. If we crowd it too much, it loses its importance, so we're trying to keep it at 4 or 5. So we're about to lose Bites in the Heights and a couple other things, so
That's a good one.
move it down.
Councilor Shelton, we have a new hire with Arts, I heard.
Yes.
I didn't hear the outcome of today's meeting.
So we just met this afternoon with Danielle Quintana, and she will start next Tuesday. And she comes with a background in arts. She's been to college, got her undergraduate degree, and has an arts emphasis.
Administration, I believe.
Okay, and she's working on getting her master's, starting soon, and so she's really excited to be on board. And she works right now also part-time with KSL, and so so she has involvement with that. I said, can you be the one, because she works at the news desk, where she can submit news stories and things. I says, does that mean you can say we need a chopper, you know, for a news story? And so she goes, that's part of what I am responsible in gleaning information for. So anyway, she's really excited about this. She says art is her passion, and she's been involved in many plays and productions, directing and things of that nature. So we're excited about that. And then Jana Lee is going to assume the responsibility as the chair of the Arts Council in, I believe, October. And so she's excited about that opportunity. Becky has said she feels she's spent enough time there and is willing to continue being part of the Arts Council. So it's been a win-win for us in many ways, we feel, and we're excited about the transition. So,
Mike, in your hiring, where we are?
We did interviews yesterday.
Yes.
Yeah, we interviewed 5 candidates. I think 3 really stood out, so we're narrowing that list down. We should have a selection by next week.
I have one more item, Mayor. I'm just sending an email to Paula. It's copied to you on our tour next week on the 4th. So 5 o'clock at the Canyon Center property. Just park on the west side of the site. There's the parking lot there for the future restaurant. I think you can.
In 2 weeks.
2 weeks. 4th?
Yeah. 4th is 2 weeks. Next week's the 20-something, yeah.
Sorry.
We'll have it on the
The
agenda
4th.
by then too.
Yes. Because there were some comments in last week's meeting that it sounds like citizens might want to also attend. I've been working with the superintendent and in consulting with Shane. What we're going to do is on the agenda, it'll notify that if citizens want to join the tour, they will need to arrive with their long pants or sturdy shoes, closed-toe shoes, their own vest, hard hat, and safety glasses, and then they can enter the site. But for safety reasons, we need to ask that they come with those too. We have those arranged for the council members and staff, so just show up with your long pants and your closed-toe shoes. And I'll leave my high heels home. So.
Thank you. Open toes.
My open toes, high heel shoes.
Okay. Anything else that?
One other update, I gave a proof of the newsletter. It is missing some photos from the proof because it's got.
I thought he sent back in yours.
There it is. Please give it a look.
See my article.
Yes, your article's up there, and also, like I said, they did a report on the tax process that is very matter of fact. There's no anything in there. Anyway, I need to get that sooner than later, so by tomorrow if we can. So we got to get it to the printer. Thanks.
All right, just, anything else on staff reports? We kind of looked at the calendar, you know, what's on the calendar?
Food truck night, last night was nice.
Yeah, I've been to a couple of them, it's awesome, yeah.
The rain blew in kind of right when they were getting there, so I think the turnout was a little lower, but.
Yeah, they did, right before, we were there pretty well, but it rained pretty hard right before.
Right.
So is Ann coordinating, are you coordinating, or is Perry coordinating? I'm not sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Mostly Perry.
Ann has done a lot of work to help us. She's the expert.
Well, the reason I asked the question is thinking of going forward, I'm very supportive of this whole concept. I think it's great. There's a lot of positive feedback when I go down to that I've been.
Yeah.
A couple of logistic things I would tweak, but.
Sure, yeah, this was a trial run. We picked Mount View Park because the people are there already. Let's bring the event to the people.
Which is, and honestly, one of the biggest issues with some others is there's no place to sit down in that mountain. You have a great big pavilion and some other tables that are there close, actually, you know.
Just planning forward, we can look at some other things to.
Yeah, you bet.
Support that.
Sure. And credit to Councilmember Bruce. It's her idea and kind of ignited the spark, and we ran with it, and I think it's been good.
Well, Brighton wanted to.
We had it last year too, and it was.
Yeah, there wasn't any place to sit down except for
It
your
was
foot.
great location.
That was good, and we left probably after 7 or so, and it looked like they were. Well, yes, there was other things going on.
Always chasing Joey.
But yeah, they were picking up. It was a little bit light when we got there, but there was lines and pretty consistent ordering going, so they should trucks themselves should look at.
All right, anything else? Do we need a closed session for anything? Closed session? Last reminder is, FYI, we have interviews all day tomorrow, so Paul, I guess we're set, we'll be here at
9:45.
9:45. Oh, yeah, give it plenty of time.
We'll have bagels in the morning.
All right, if there's no other business, we just have to sit here for 20 minutes. No, we stand adjourned, thank you.
Oh, can I get a motion to adjourn?
Do I have to have a motion?
Yes,
I
please.
thought we can't make motions in this meeting.
Guess we'll have to wait till next Wednesday, or next Tuesday.
Okay, have a motion, we adjourn? All in favor, say aye.
Thank you.
You better change that. Thank you. Good night.
I'm sorry,
You told me 9:15.
45.
Well, I have mine in writing.
I have mine ready.
The email you just sent me said 9:15.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's a typo, it's 45.
No, I'm fine, I'll be here at 9:15.
The article good too, the tax article,
Oh, I didn't
on
read
page,
it.
3 or 4, I think it is.
Mayor and Mr. Shelton, if you give me your folders, I'll go and put those questions in really quick and
Okay.
bring them back to you.
Oh, super.
Hey Paula, can I talk with you about these sometime before we go?
I'll just wait.
Are you sure? Okay, thank you.
Quiet.
I am going to shut this baby down.